I call the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, what a desperate, distrusted, dysfunctional, disastrous government we've got.
The
so
member
desperate.
for Menzies should recall Section 90, and I will be reminding people of imputations that are giving, are implying intent. The member for Menzies has the call. So
desperate, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Labor Party has to come in here this afternoon and defame the Coalition's policy. And I say defame because what is their complaint? Their complaint is that the Coalition has a better paid parental leave scheme policy than does the government. That's their complaint. That's their complaint, because that's the reality. They talk about the paid parental leave scheme, but let's take a couple of things into account. Firstly, how did they construct it? They constructed it in part by cannibalising the baby bonus that had been put in place by the Howard-Costello government. And I note that the previous member conceded that Mr Costello, when he was Treasurer, for all of those years, balanced the books more than the current Treasurer of Australia has ever been able to do in the 4 years that he's been the Treasurer of this country. In fact, each year he promises a surplus. For 4 years now, we get the same statement and the same statements from the Treasurer, Mr Swan. He's going to deliver a surplus. And yet, year after year after year after year so far, that promise has never been fulfilled. There hasn't been a surplus. And of course we get it again now. I'm going to deliver a surplus. The government's going to deliver a surplus. We won't know for over 12 months whether that's the case or not. But so far, if you want to go on the record of this government, the promise has amounted to nothing for each of 4 years. But let's get back to the subject matter of this discussion, namely a paid parental leave scheme. So the first thing is that the baby bonus put in place by the Howard-Costello government is cannibalised, modified in order to be able to pay for a paid parental leave scheme. But what's happening with the baby bonus? In the next piece of legislation that's to come before this parliament, when this debate is over in a few minutes' time, there is a piece of legislation which is going to do two things to the baby bonus. The first thing it's going to do is to reduce the baby bonus from $5,437 back to $5,000. So much for helping the families of Australia. So much for helping the men and women of Australia having children. But not only are they going to reduce the baby bonus, which has been cannibalised in the first place in part to pay for the paid parental leave scheme, but they're also going to put a cap on the indexation. So instead of the baby bonus going up by an indexed amount for the next 3 years, each year for the next 3 years, what's going to happen? It's going to come down to $5,000 and there will be no indexation in place for the next 3 years. So they can come in here with the gall to talk about what we're doing, when in the reality is that the actual thing they're doing, which will be in the debate following this one, will be a reduction in the baby bonus. What gall from this desperate government? So we've got two problems here for the government. First of all, they take an existing scheme, change that in order to pay for, in part, their paid parental leave scheme. Secondly, they then reduce the amount of money which is available under the baby bonus over the next 3 years for intending parents in this country. And then they come in and complain that our policy is better. And it is better. I mean, we're going to pay parents the actual wage rather than one based on the minimum wage. Look at the schemes around the world and make a comparison. In those schemes around the world, almost every one of them is based on actual wages rather than the minimum wage as the way in which it's paid. And then on top of that, we're going to include superannuation in it. We have the member for Maribyrnong spouting off every now and again about superannuation. Well, where's the superannuation component of the paid parental leave scheme that this government's put in place? It doesn't exist, and they know in their hearts that it doesn't exist, and they know in their hearts that this is a better proposal than what they've got there at the present time, and yet they come in here and complain about it. And this is where we've got to with this government, why I called it desperate, because it's now seeking to defame the policies of the opposition in order somehow to make itself look good. So not only have we got it here on the paid parental leave scheme, in which a better policy is being proposed, we've heard in the last few days about how the coalition is not supporting the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Again, totally wrong. Again, we've said this is a scheme which we are supporting. Put it in place. What we've said is, where's the money? Where's the money? No money's been put forward so far, and when are you actually going to commit and tell us how that money is going to be put forward? But of course, no answer to that. Just this imputation that somehow the coalition is not supporting this scheme. So let's get real about these things, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reality here is that the coalition does support families. It's supported families right throughout its term in office. And what better thing can you do for families than actually keep down prices and actually ensure that people have got jobs? I mean, we're spouting about jobs and employment, the last speaker. Can I remind him and his colleagues on the other side that when this Labor government came to office, the unemployment rate in Australia was 4.3%. 4.3%. What is it today? 5.1%? And higher in some states. So they spout 7.1 in Townsville, my honourable colleague tells me here, 7.1%. Yet it was 4.3% when this government came to office. So let's hear. Yeah, they're doing such a good job, as my other honourable friend behind me says. So the reality is that this is a government under which families are actually being treated worsely. And of course, at the same time, cost of living pressures are going on families right across Australia. Electricity prices have increased in the last 4 years on average across this country by 61%. 61%. Gas prices have increased on average by 37%. And what we know is that this government, from the 1st of July this year, is introducing a carbon tax which will further push up those prices. Now, the great lie in this policy debate is that somehow the carbon tax is only going to be implemented on 500 companies. First of all, we can't be told who the 500 companies are. That's a major secret. Maybe the government doesn't know itself. But the implication of what's being said is that somehow this will be totally absorbed by these companies and that will be that. Well, the lie to that was given this week by Virgin, who said that they're going to increase the cost of their domestic airfares by $6 because of the carbon tax, following what Qantas had already announced in relation to their airfares. And do you think that the top 500 companies across Australia are not going to follow Qantas and Virgin in relation to this and push up their prices? Of course they will. So I've said that electricity went up by 61% over the last 4 years and gas has gone up by 37%. We are told by the energy producers that electricity prices and gas prices will go up by 9 to 10% in addition to what they might have gone up otherwise, simply because of the carbon tax. And here we have a government talking about its care for families. Well, that's just bunkum when you see what's happening. But it's not just electricity and gas prices. Water and sewage rates have increased by an average of 58% across this nation in the last 4 years. Health costs have gone up by an average of 20%, and that's even before the Labor Party's hit on the private health insurance scheme. Education costs have gone up by an average of 24%. So just health and education, two major items of expenditure for any family in this country. One's gone up by 20%, the other's gone up by 24%, and they're going to continue to rise. And if you don't think that a carbon tax is going to flow through into all goods and services in Australia, then you must be living in fantasy land, like I suspect some of the members opposite are. The cost of food has gone up by 13% on average overall in Australia. Well, food requires energy to produce. Food requires energy to process. Food requires energy to transport from one place to another, from where it was manufactured to where it's stored, to the supermarket shelves of shops all over this country. That's going to go up as well. And who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for that? The families of Australia. So don't come in here, I would say, to members of the opposition and try to pretend that somehow you're doing something which is great for the families of Australia when you're ripping out the costs in terms of what they're going to pay for in the coming years. And then rent has increased by 25% for families who are renting across Australia. So all of these costs have gone up under this Labor government, hitting families over the last 4 years, and we know that they're going to go up even further into the future. There is a paid parental scheme in place. We acknowledge that. We concede that. The government's put one in. But we're saying that you can do better than that. You can put a better paid parental leave scheme in place, and you don't need to be ripping down the amount paid under the baby bonus at the same time. The reality is that what we've got is a better proposition than what the government is offering at the present time. It doesn't need people to come in and defame this policy.